Am I wrong for not forgiving my parents and pushing back against my boyfriend's pressure to move on? I 27F have been struggling with a lot of emotional baggage from my childhood, and it's been weighing on me for as long as I can remember. I don't even know when things started going wrong, but there was a time when my parents seemed to love and care for me like any normal family would. Then, one day, everything changed. They became strict, harsh, and distant. They stopped showing affection, stopped talking to me unless it was to criticize or scold me, and started punishing me for the smallest things. It was as if overnight, I wasn't their daughter anymore, just a burden to be controlled. I could never understand what I did wrong. They never explained it to me either. All I ever heard was, "This is wrong," or "You can't do this," without any reason why. I didn't know what was happening or why my life had turned into a nightmare, but the rules and punishments were relentless. My dad, especially, was violent. He would beat me with rattan sticks or belts for things as small as not taking a shower immediately after coming home from school. Even minor mistakes like forgetting to clean up my room were met with harsh punishment. My mother was no better. She didn't beat me as often, but she made my life hell in other ways. She'd scream at me for every little thing, threatening me constantly. Every word that came out of her mouth was negative. She'd shame me for my appearance, for my skin being too tan because I liked to play outside. She'd shame me in front of the whole family if I got a bad grade or if my handwriting wasn't neat enough. The shame and humiliation were never ending. I grew up feeling like nothing. I didn't have anyone to turn to, and I hated them for what they did to me. They were my first bullies. They conditioned me to believe that this abuse was normal, so when other people, teachers, or classmates bullied me, I thought it was just the way life was. I never told my parents when I was mistreated because I knew it would only get worse at home. I begged my parents to let me move out for university, and it wasn't easy. They wanted me to go to a local college, but I fought tooth and nail to get their permission to leave. I overpromised, telling them I'd make them proud, but deep down, I was terrified that I'd be stuck in that hell forever. The day I left for university was the first time I felt any sense of freedom. But even then, the scars they left on me came with me. Growing up in their household, I learned to lie, steal, and bully others just to survive. They taught me that manipulation was the only way to get by. I became a master at making up stories just to avoid their wrath. I even ended up bullying my best friend in school because I didn't know how else to deal with the anger and pain I carried. Despite all the suffering, they made me go through it with a smile on my face. My mom forced me into countless after-school courses, math, English, Mandarin, piano lessons, whether I wanted them or not. We weren't rich, but she spent whatever she could on these classes, even though I wasn't passionate about them. It felt like she was throwing money at anything that made her look good, but she never cared about what I wanted or needed. I wasn't even allowed to stop the piano lessons, even though we didn't have a real piano at home. All I had was a cheap keyboard, and yet she still forced me to continue, guilt-tripping me by saying how much it all cost. Even when I was sick, she wouldn't let me rest. She'd say things like, "We're not rich, so you have to go to class no matter what," as if money mattered more than my health. I can't count how many times I had to drag myself to school, feverish and exhausted, because she didn't want me to miss anything. The worst part was how she never gave me enough allowance. I was always starving at school, especially on days when we had physical education. I only had a small bottle of water and a tiny snack to get me through the day, and it was never enough. Eventually, I just stopped caring. My grades slipped, I lost motivation, and I felt completely disconnected from everything. I was the only girl in my class with such low grades, and I didn't even understand why at first. But the truth was, I had no confidence. I overthought everything. I feared every waking moment, worried that the next mistake would lead to another beating or screaming match. I never slept well, and I constantly lived in fear of being humiliated or punished again. Now, I've moved out, but the damage is still there. Nothing in my life is going the way it should. I'm in a relationship with my boyfriend 27M, who tries to help but just doesn't understand. He's the type of person who believes in logic and reason above all else. He keeps telling me that I need to forgive my parents so I can move on. He says that I'll never heal if I hold on to this hatred and resentment, and that forgiving them is the only way I can have a better life. But how can I forgive them when everything they did still haunts me? Every aspect of my life is a result of their abuse. I'm easily startled by sudden noises or movements. I can't sleep properly. I live with constant anxiety, and my body is still in fight or flight mode because of everything they put me through. How can I forgive them when every second of my life reminds me of their cruelty? Whenever I bring up the idea of therapy, my boyfriend dismisses it. He says that therapy and healing practices are just all talk and that, in the end, I'll still need to accept what happened and forgive my parents. But I'm not ready to do that. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready. His logical approach makes me feel hopeless, like I'm broken beyond repair. I've told him how his words feel more like demands than support, but he just doesn't get it. I don't know what to do. I love my boyfriend, but I hate the way he keeps pushing me to forgive my parents when I'm still drowning in the trauma they caused. He thinks forgiveness is the solution, but I can't see it that way. I'm angry, hurt, and exhausted. I feel like no one truly understands how deep this pain runs. But am I wrong for not forgiving my parents and pushing back against my boyfriend's pressure to move on? Update. Hey, it's been a while since my last post, and I wanted to give an update because things have taken a few unexpected turns. I received a lot of supportive responses, advice, and messages of solidarity, and for that, I'm genuinely grateful. Hearing from people who truly understood or who had gone through similar experiences made me feel less alone. It's overwhelming to see that so many others are also on this painful journey of healing from abusive families. In my last post, I was struggling not just with my past, but also with my boyfriend's insistence that forgiveness was the only way to move forward. That pressure was tearing me apart. So here's what's happened since then. After my post, I decided that therapy was the only path I hadn't explored fully. Despite my boyfriend's dismissal of it, I needed someone objective, trained, and unbiased to help me work through the endless cycle of guilt, fear, and confusion that my parents ingrained in me. I found a therapist who specializes in childhood trauma, and honestly, starting therapy felt like both a terrifying and relieving step. My therapist validated a lot of the feelings I had. She helped me see that forgiveness isn't something I have to rush or even achieve if it doesn't feel right for me. She emphasized that my primary focus should be on reclaiming my sense of self and building boundaries, not rushing to make peace with the people who hurt me. Hearing that felt freeing, like I'd been given permission to feel what I felt without guilt. During our sessions, we worked through some of the memories I had buried or didn't allow myself to examine closely. With her help, I realized that a lot of my anxieties stem from a lifetime of being conditioned to fear punishment, failure, and disapproval. She taught me grounding techniques and ways to recognize and control my anxiety responses. I'm still learning, but for the first time, I feel like there's a path forward that doesn't depend on rushing into forgiveness. Therapy has been tough but eye-opening, and I'm thankful I took this step. This journey of healing has also forced me to re-evaluate my relationship with my boyfriend. He's a logical thinker, the kind of person who believes every problem has a solution, and for him, forgiveness is that solution. He doesn't mean harm, but he hasn't fully understood the depth of my trauma, and it's causing a serious rift between us. After starting therapy, I tried talking to him again. I explained that I was finally in a space where I could explore my pain safely and that pushing me to forgive my parents felt like invalidating everything I'd gone through. His response, unfortunately, was the same. He told me he couldn't understand why I couldn't just put the past behind me and insisted that staying angry would keep me trapped. That was when I realized something important. He wasn't equipped to help me heal. I've started to accept that while he may love me, his perspective on healing is too limited for what I need. I've always loved how logical he is, but his approach feels increasingly dismissive and unsupportive. I don't know if this relationship can survive the changes I'm going through. Right now, I'm focused on my growth, and I'm coming to terms with the idea that my relationship might not be what's best for me. Through therapy, I've been learning more about who I am outside the context of my past. For so long, I only defined myself as someone who had endured this trauma, but I'm beginning to see that there's more to me. I started doing things that I wasn't allowed to as a kid, things that brought me joy but that my parents dismissed as pointless. For instance, I always wanted to paint, but my mother would scoff at anything she saw as unproductive. So I signed up for a local painting class. The first time I held a paintbrush, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear, like I was breaking some forbidden rule. But with every stroke, I felt more liberated, as if I were reclaiming parts of myself I had long buried. Rediscovering hobbies and interests without the fear of judgment has been a revelation. I'm slowly building a life filled with things I love, things that I choose for myself, and it feels amazing. One of the hardest parts of my journey has been figuring out how to deal with my parents now. For years, they've been trying to re-establish a relationship with me, acting as if everything that happened in my childhood is water under the bridge. My dad occasionally sends me messages, and my mom will ask how I'm doing, but they've never acknowledged the pain they caused. They never apologized, never admitted to the abuse. At first, I kept them at arm's length, responding minimally, but never bringing up the past because I was terrified of confrontation. But after weeks in therapy, I gathered the courage to finally say what I've wanted to for years. In a long, carefully written letter, I laid everything out: the hurt, the betrayal, the lasting impact of their actions. I told them that I was in therapy because of them and that I couldn't pretend to have a normal relationship with them unless they were willing to acknowledge the harm they'd done. Their response wasn't what I'd hoped for. My mom's reply was brief and defensive, claiming she did her best and didn't understand why I held on to these grudges. My dad didn't respond at all. As painful as their reactions were, I feel strangely at peace. I said my piece. I stood up for myself, and even though they refused to acknowledge their faults, I finally feel like I've regained some control over our relationship. Since then, I've decided to go low contact with them, restricting my interactions to the bare minimum and only engaging when I feel emotionally prepared. Cutting them out completely might be a future step, but for now, this limited contact is helping me maintain my mental health. As for forgiveness, I've come to redefine what it means for me. I don't think I'll ever forgive my parents in the traditional sense. I may never be able to let go of what they did or pretend it doesn't affect me. But I'm learning to make peace with the fact that they may never be capable of remorse or accountability. I'm forgiving myself, however, for carrying this anger and for all the ways it's impacted my life. This anger served a purpose. It protected me when I had no other means of defending myself. I'm starting to view it as a part of my past, not a burden, and that shift in perspective has been incredibly freeing. I'm still in therapy, and I plan to stay as long as I need it. My therapist has become a lifeline, guiding me through the difficult but rewarding work of healing. I'm also considering joining a support group for people who've survived abusive childhoods. Knowing that there are others who understand these struggles firsthand might provide an additional layer of support, something my boyfriend can't offer. On the relationship front, I'm not ready to break things off with my boyfriend just yet. I do love him, and I think part of his insistence on forgiveness comes from a genuine desire to see me happy. But I'm setting firmer boundaries in our conversations about my family, making it clear that forgiveness isn't something he can push on me. We're taking things one day at a time, but I've let him know that if he can't support my process as it is, then our relationship may not survive in the long term. This journey isn't over, but I'm finally seeing glimpses of who I can become outside the shadow of my past. I'm learning that healing doesn't have to mean forgiving the unforgivable. It can mean prioritizing my own well-being and embracing a life I never had the chance to experience. I don't know what the future holds with my boyfriend, my parents, or even within myself, But I do know this, I'm not trapped anymore. I'm finally moving forward on my own terms. Thank you all for the support and understanding. Maybe I'll keep you updated as I continue this journey, or not, but maybe someday, I'll reach a place where the memories of my past feel like just that, memories, not the force that defines me.